Okay, so the quality without a name.
The eyes without a face.
Yeah. So we're gonna talk. We're gonna try to do two today: the quality without a name and pattern languages. Yeah. So very straightforward. What is the quality without a name, Marie?
Well, it has no name, so I can't tell you.
No. Okay.
But no, this is about trying to look for um, some kind of objective quality that makes something good in some sense.
Yeah. I think you did exactly what I was looking for, and my camera is not being fixed for some reason. I think you did exactly what I was looking for because you dodged the question. You didn't say what it is. You said what it is about.
Well, it
Uh,
has no name, so
yeah, yeah. I think that's part of the mystery. So what is this? Nobody can even name it. So that's a great start. But I can actually explain this so everyone, if anyone watching this in the future is asking yourself, what is this about? This is about that feeling that you have when you're looking at something, and if you are a developer, if you are a programmer, you probably, I hope you have seen this before. When you look at something, you sense some sort of something emerges out of that piece of code, that couple, maybe a dozen lines of code, something emerges from that, and there is a great feeling when you identify that that's emerging, but you don't really can explain why it's emerging. So the way that Gabriel goes about it, he talks about whatever this is some objective beauty going on. Especially because Alexander, which is the architect that inspires Gabriel, he also talks about this property, quality without a name, in architecture. So let me see. Where is the part of the text? Yeah, here. Alexander's search, culminating in pattern languages, was to find an objective meaning for beauty, for the aliveness that certain buildings, places, and human activities have. The objective meaning is the quality without a name, and I believe you cannot come to grips with Alexander in the software community unless you come to grips with this concept. I think this quote is worth reading, so I was no longer willing to start looking at any patterns unless it presented itself to me as having the capacity to connect up with some part to this quality. Unless a particular pattern actually was capable of generating the kind of life and spirit that we're now discussing, and that it had this quality itself, my tendency was to dismiss it, even though we explored many, many patterns. Um, yeah, so this is a very relatable thing to me. I hope it is for you as well, Marie,
it kinda is actually.
because I've encountered many times a particular solution of a particular problem that it was not only clever, it was not only it was not only clever but also efficient, but also scalable, generic. Of course, I'm using very specific words, but we're gonna go through a list of words here that are a little bit more vague.
There's one word that's missing from that list actually that just came to me right now, and it is harmonious. That word is not there, and
Yeah,
it should be.
yeah. Harmonious is one of them. Uh, well, but before getting there, I think this is also a good thing. Uh, One of the key ideas in this book that he's talking about, Notes of the Synthesis of Form, was that in good design there must be an underlying correspondence between the solution of the problem and the solution of the solution. Good design proceeds by writing down the requirements, analyzing the interactions on the basis of potential misfits, producing hierarchical decomposition of the parts, and piecing together a structure whose structural hierarchy is the exact counterpart of the functional hierarchy established during the analysis of the program. So there is some sort of like the piece the pieces fit perfectly among each other. So you have a problem and you have a solution, and you feel that the solution is perfectly fit for the problem at hand. Um, oh, and something else that I should say is that we are leveraging the hypothesis that beauty is not contingent. Beauty is not subjective. This particular beauty is not subjective. Because that's a very modern thing to establish, right? That beauty is contingent and subjective. We are trying to get away from that. So in order to get away from that, we need to try to describe it, to define it, and that's what we're going to struggle with. Um,
Well, we already failed to name it, so there's that.
yeah, that's a first flag. We even failed to name it. Imagine defining it. Um, uh, well, this is okay. Okay, so a system that has this quality when it is at peace with itself, when it has no internal contradictions, when it's not divided against itself, when it's true to its own inner forces. Yeah, so the system doesn't implode, right? So it is internally consistent. And these forces are separate from the requirements of the system as a whole. In software, we hear about gathering requirements through talking to the users or customers or by examining the problem space. Uh, we hear about traceability, which means that every procedure or object can be traced back to the requirement that spawned it. But if Alexander is right, then many of the key characteristics of the system come from internal forces and not external requirements. This is very interesting because it's basically establishing that if you have a particular feature in software, what we usually try to go on with is, okay, what business rule dictated the existence of this feature? What is being said here is that there may be cases in which a particular existence doesn't come from a business. It comes from requirements within the software itself. Um, so that's I can also relate to that. I have seen this before. Okay, so now we're going to go to the list of words that, as Marinho said, harmonious will definitely fit into this description, which is that we don't have a name for this quality, but we have words that resemble it, which are alive, whole, comfortable, free, exact, egoless, and eternal, and
And harmonious.
harmonious for
Yep.
sure. So we're going to go through these words and try to see where the problems with each word. Well, we can all agree that all of them are kind of vague by common sense. But for some random reason, elegant, aesthetical should also be in this list.
Can we add
Uh,
cute as well?
cute, I think elegant is better, but cute is available as well. So the word alive captures some of the meaning when you think about a fire that is alive. Which is well a pile of burning logs, but a structure of logs in which they are sufficient and well placed air chimneys within the structure. When someone has built such a fire, you don't see them push the logs about with a poker, but you do see them lift a particular log and move it an inch or maybe a half an inch so that air flows more smoothly or the flame curls along around the log in a specific way to catch a higher up log. Yeah, so this is a very harmonious burning fire, let's say.
Yep.
There's also the fact that the word alive is a metaphor. It is hard to know whether something literally not alive, like a fire, is in fact alive. Like it's basically a personification, right? So this is a language trait that you can use, which you add human-like things to unhuman things, to things, such as being alive. And when we try to think what makes a fire alive, we're not really sure, which makes sense. Whole captures part of the meaning because, as Alexander puts it, a thing that is a whole is free from internal contradictions or inner forces that can tear it apart. Uh, then he goes to an analogy of the tree, which means that every part of the system is in harmony with every other part. On the other hand, a steep bank with no trees is easily eroded. The system is not whole and the system can destroy itself. The grasses and trees are destroyed by the erosion. the bank is torn down and the lake is filled with mud and disappears. The first system of trees, bank and lake, has the quality without a name, which is the system in which the trees are working as the as the glue to the soil, I guess, uh, because it evades erosion. The word comfortable invokes more that meets the eye. So then there's an explanation. Uh, I think this is worth reading as well. Imagine yourself on a winter afternoon with a pot of tea, a book, and a reading light, and two or three huge pillows to lean back against. Now make yourself comfortable, not in some way that you can show to other people and say how much you like it. I mean it for yourself. You can put the tea where you can reach it, but in a place where you can't possibly knock it over. You put the light down to shine on the book, but not too brightly, and so that you can't see the naked bulb. You put the cushions behind you and place them carefully one by one, just where you want them to support your back, your neck, your arm. So you are supported just comfortably, just as you want to sip your tea and read and dream. When you take the trouble to do all of that, and you do it carefully, with much attention, then it may begin to have the quality with no name. Yeah, this is again very relatable. Very relatable. It's a very
That-
tricky thing. I particularly have this kind of routine for sleeping. Like there is a certain amount of centimeters that if I put my pillow, it's not gonna be comfortable. But if I decrease that amount of centimeters, it's also not good. So there is some sort of sweet spot. Uh, well, in
It's a
this
very
case,
fine, yeah, it's a very fine line, right?
there are many variables as well. The problem is that comfortable is also vague. It has many other meanings. So, for example, a family with too much money in a house that is too warm also is comfortable. Now, the word free helps define equality by implying that things are not completely perfect or overplanned or precise. Uh, can have the quality too. So, imperfection may also have the quality without a name. It also frees us from the confines and limitations of whole and comfortable. So again, these words, although they're basically like counter requirements. If you have more than one, you have to diminish the other and vice versa. So free, of course, is not correct because it can imply reckless abandon or not having roots in its own nature. The word exact counterbalances comfortable and free, which can give you the impression of fuzziness and over looseness. The quality is loose and fluid, but it involves precise, exact forces acting in balance. Um, so if you try to build a small table on which to put bird seed, uh, one moment.
Mm,
Okay, I'm back. Anyway, you must know that the exact force determines the blackbird's behavior so that they will be able to use the table as you plan. Yeah, so like as I said, there is a fine tuning. Uh, but of course, because everything is it's a problem in this case, exact fails because it means the wrong sort of thing to many people, which is correct. Usually when people say something is exact, we mean that it fits some abstract image exactly. If I cut a square of cardboard and make it perfectly exact, it means that I have made the cardboard perfectly square. Its sides are exactly equal, and its angles are exactly 90 degrees. The meaning of the word exact, which I use here, is almost the opposite. A thing that has the quality of a name never fits any image exactly. What is exactly what is exact in its adaptation to the forces which are in it. I don't understand quite well what he means because there he's basically saying that there's no image, there's no even abstract image of like squariness or triangularity, but there is. Uh, like if I ask you to imagine a triangle, you can imagine an infinite amount of triangles, but you know what I mean when I say a triangle by you have an image. You have an image. But he's saying that a thing that has the quality cannot fit in any of them. And I don't know how that can be though, because I kind of assume that this imagery process it's kind of natural to our human understanding. But well, it is what it is. And now we're gonna go to
It,
eagle. Go on.
I'm just gonna say it is fuzzy. It is very fuzzy.
Hmm. And now the word eternal. No, the word egoless is wrong because it's possible to build something with the qualitative name while returning some personality.
You
Um,
skip the paragraph, but yeah, the paragraph is more about okay, if you try to impose too much of your will upon the thing, it will prevent it from having space to be itself, and so it will fail to have that quality, right?
oh, I jumped this. Sorry.
Yeah.
Uh, when a place is lifeless or unreal, there is almost a mastermind behind it. It is so filled with the will of the maker that there is no room for its own nature. By contrast, think of a decoration of an old bench. Small hearts carved in it, and simple holes cut out while it was being put together. They are not carved according to some plan. They are carefree, carved into it wherever there seems to be a gap. Huh. Okay. And finally, the word eternal. By this word, Alexander means that something with a quality so strong, so balanced, so clearly self-maintaining it, that it reaches in the realm of eternal truth, that if it lasts for only one instant. But eternal hints at the mysterious, and there is something mysterious about the quality. Alexander
No,
concludes
there's
his discussion of this quality with the following. The quality with no name includes the simpler, sweeter qualities, but it is so ordinary as well that it somehow reminds us of the passing of our life. It is a slightly bitter quality. um, yeah, so now that we finished all
so
the... Oh, go on.
so like dark chocolate, I guess.
Yeah, but I don't think dark chocolate is worthy of any of these words. It has this slightly bitter quality at the end, but it is kind of um, it's kind of weird because we are using contradiction like words in contradiction. They are forces against each other. So it's a quality that has all of those things, but it is internally consistent. But we are trying to use words that clash with each other to describe it. So it's kind of well, it's an investigation for sure. So now I mentioned to you this as well. This quality is mentioned in this book, which is a philosophical inquiry into the origin of ideas of the sublime and the beautiful. So this is from Edmund Burke. He tries his investigation goes as a summary goes following the following. Uh, what are the characteristics that are observable about things that we see as beautiful? He doesn't show because it's a slightly different study than what this is being done here. Here we're trying to see on the what causes the side effect of beauty. So what is the cause? This is not what Burke is trying to do. He actually says in the beginning, I'm not going to try to do that because I assume that he agrees that it's very hard. What I'm going to try to do instead is to try to have a collection of characteristics and adjectives and properties that are commonly seen among beautiful things. Yeah. Um, so then, well, we're gonna see in the next section, but Alexander's pattern languages is an attempted mechanism to achieve a final product containing the quality within a name. And well, we must try to understand the quality as well, and more importantly, can we obtain this quality in software? So I also think that's well, I think I'm going to repeat this further on the line, but I think there's something that should be said about the quality within a name, which is the following. Uh, there is some sort of understanding in the software community that there is a difference between practical software and beautiful software. And usually, when people are talking about this distinction, especially, I don't know, in FP languages like Haskell, for example, they like to talk about aesthetics, right? So, uh, there is a very common um understanding among the community that you should not go for aesthetics. You should go for practicality. Of course, usually they have a very loosely defined meaning of practicality. So if you ask them what do you mean, they're gonna go to the habitability argument that we've seen before. They're gonna say, who can read this? And you're gonna say, I can read it. And then they're gonna say, yeah, but it's only you can read it. What about the other developers? What about your team? What if they are not accustomed to or comfortable with this way of writing it? And that usually is where, well, the conversation ends. But we already talked about this. The habitability argument that Gabriel proposes also suffers from this problem. What if people improve? What if they change? What if something that they classified as hard and unreadable before, now it is readable?
Perhaps even natural, we could say.
Yeah. So it's very. We're gonna talk about this later because patterns of languages tries to mash the two things together. There will not be a differentiating factor between the architect and the designer. They should live in a single mind, right? And well, I'm gonna talk about this later if you have the time, but I think we will. But I think it's very important to notice this fact because it's a very common thing in Haskell about this whole aesthetics argument. Um, okay, anyway, so let's continue. What is revolutionary about Alexander is that he's resuming the quest for an understanding of objective quality that science and philosophy abandoned in the modern era. In the 17th and 18th centuries, attention developed in which mind and matter were separated by science and philosophy. Magetta will have tons and tons and tons and tons of things to say about this. From this came the separation of fact and value. After the separation, a fact had no value associated with it. A fact could not be good or bad, it just was. Science then tried to find theories that explain things as they were, and no longer sought what was good or beautiful about things. That is, we no longer sought the objective characteristics of beauty, which is what we are looking for now. Today it is hard for us to understand the fact and value once they are tied together. It is hard for us as software designers to think of what there could be about a software system that would have the quality without a name. And even if it could, it would be difficult to not dismiss it as something only in the eye of the beholder. So it is beautiful to me, it is not beautiful to you, and who is on the right and in the right and who is in the wrong. That's the reason. I think that's actually a very under understood, misunderstood maybe even concept of like if there's no objective anything, there's no way to tell apart who is in the right. That's a fundamental thing. Uh, it's a very fundamental thing. The study of beauty stopped because beauty became a mere contingency. Whether something was beautiful didn't depend much or at all on the thing, only on the thing as perceived by a necessary observer. It was not simply beautiful; it was beautiful to someone. Yes.
Yeah, that's kind of sad actually.
Yeah. So Alexander is trying to reverse all of this um, entanglement. So his program was not only to find patterns that explain the existence of a quality without a name, but also to find patterns that generate objects with that quality. And then I
The
think,
patterns themselves must have the same quality as well.
yeah, we're gonna go into that in the next section, but that's for sure. Uh, yeah, I think I'm gonna read this as well because this is also very interesting. So myself, as some of you know, was a mathematician. I spent several years in the early 60s trying to define a view of design allied with science in which values were also let in by the back door. I too played with operations research, linear programming, all the fascinating toys with mathematics and science have to offer us, and try to see how these things can give us a new view of design, what to design and how to design. Finally, however, I recognize that this view is essentially not productive and not for mathematical or scientific reasons, if you like. It was essential to find a theory in which value and fact are one, in which we recognize that there is a central value, approachable through feeling and approachable by loss of self, which is deeply connected to facts and forms a single indivisible world picture within which productive results can be obtained. Yeah, so
This
this is,
reminds this reminds me a lot of Taoism, actually.
well, this should remind everyone about religion, essentially. The way that he's explaining this, trying to tie together the value and the fact, I feel it's something that anyone would say, man, he's talking about a religious thing. Which is, well, we just gave him an example. Um yeah,
Well, Buddhism also, when he mentions loss of self, and actually, if Mageta was here, he would definitely say Christianity, and he would be right as well.
yeah. This means that he can examine. Oh, well, so now we have like I what Alexander was talking about was not the norm, uh, but uh, he was lucky in comparison to us because his architecture has a very long history and artifacts that are visible today. This means that it can examine things built before science and philosophy relegated beauty to contingency. We in software are not so lucky because we now live in an era in which those things are separate. But there are programs that we can look at and about which and say, no, I'm not maintaining that clutch. And there are other programs that we can say, wow, who wrote this? That's what I mean. Like very, very common example. So well, I work. Well, recently not much, but I used to work with Marin on the same team at work, and there was a time in which I was more often reviewing Marin's PRs and looking at the code that he was producing to the production. And I was once like I didn't have Git blame of working on my editor. I just look at it and said, 100% this was Marinho who wrote this. I was undoubtful. I was very certain that this piece of code was written by this person because it's something that I identify. I identify. And that particular code actually has the quality without a name. I don't know if you remember that one, Marinho. Anyway.
I think I know what you're talking about. It's that time I wrote an interpreter, right?
Yeah, yeah, that had the quality without a name. Um, yeah, and here comes another hot take, which is that it seems clear to Alexander that the buildings with the quality are not made of modular units. Some of his examples of buildings or things with the quality are built with bricks and other such small modular units, but not large ones. If you were thinking that Alexander is just talking about plain old, highly abstract and modular code, perhaps you should think again. His parallel languages provide a well thought out abstract language for talking about buildings, and he encourages new pattern languages, but only when they embody the quality with their name. He does not endorse willy nilly pattern languages. Well, we're
this
going to go back to this sentence later, but go on.
this makes me think that you know how people in general tend to, well, I guess not people in general, people who know FP tend to dislike modern object-oriented programming, right?
Yeah,
I think that actually has some relation to this because if you think about it, what's the unit of modularity in FP? Is the function, right?
yeah,
But if you compare a function to a class, a function is oftentimes tiny, right? And classes in modern OO tend to
Mhm.
be very large, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, that sounds related to this. Yes. Uh, um, then he goes to say that Alexander admires buildings from Europe and some even third world countries. And then it comes this is very interesting. So the European buildings an interesting constraint. There isn't much space, right? So there is some sort of something related to the lack of available space, lack of available space. So people in our buildings need to take up as little space as possible, and that changes the layout. And common areas are cleverly put together to conserve what is precious. The same is true in many other cultures. So basically, you remove the noise and you get the most out of a particular volume of space, essentially. Which is often what happens with with code with the quality without a name, because usually the code is not big actually. When you stumble across these pieces, you actually see that they are tiny. They do a lot, but they are tiny. So that's very relatable as well. Uh, yeah, one effect is that things are on a smaller scale, where perfection is not as easily achieved, and where regularity from irregular small parts is possible. Errors are seen as errors only in the context in which those errors are relatively large. When they are small, they form part of an attractiveness of appropriate placement, which is kind of weird. Which is kind of weird. One way to think about it is that nature has a regularity that is not captured well by precise prefactal geometry. So geometry is too precise, too exact to capture nature well. With fractals, though, we can simulate natural surroundings, and the approximate nature of small irregularities is mimicked by irregular placement in small areas. Yeah, this actually makes sense. When you see, like, imagine a picture, and now imagine that you have a field of grass. If all the tiny little pieces of grass are exactly one copy of the other, it's gonna look weird as fuck.
Yep.
It needs to have some sort of irregularity in order to make sense to be natural to you. So yeah, so small irregularities. Uh, yeah, now we're gonna go back to poetry. So another fact is that creativity is spawned by constraint, which is most easily explained by an analogy to poetry. There are many reasons why poetry uses forms, rhyme, stanzic structure. One reason that such devices aid memory and poetry was originally an oral art form. Another important reason is that placing constraints on the form of a written statement, it becomes less easy to use a phrase or word that easily comes to mind because it probably won't fit. So what are we talking about? We are talking that the fact that you have to respect some what seems to be arbitrary constraints, right? Actually, they are there because they force you to be more creative. Because if those constraints were not there, why would you care about making poetry instead of a prose? That's a very interesting way to put it. Because I was once on the side of the argument that why do you have to have all of these constraints? They seem kind of random. You need to have like this and this and this and this amount of lines. Why?
Well, the original reason was we need to remember stuff and we haven't invented writing yet, right?
Sure, but now there is another reason, which is that if it comes to mind easily, it's most likely a hackneyed phrase, or at least one that the poet uses or hears frequently enough that it has lost its edge. By forcing the poet to write in a form, the easy automatic phrase is eliminated, and the poet is forced to find other ways of saying what is meant. And when that isn't possible, the poet must look for other things to say. In both cases, the constraints force the poet to look for something new to say or new way to say it. Therefore, form in poetry is a device that helps create a climate or context for creativity and newness. So here's the thing: we are kind of trusting the method, right? So there is a method, there is a structure, there is a form, and what you're saying is, if I cannot say whatever I want to say in this form, maybe I shouldn't say it. Like it's almost reversing the incentives, right? So usually you have something to say, but it doesn't fit. And what do? Well, you still want to say it, so usually you drop the form, or even swap the medium. You go to prose instead of poetry. Here it's kind of like if I have something to say and it doesn't fit, I'm not trading the form. I'm keeping it, and now I have to either drop it or think in another way to say it. And of course, whenever that happens, that forces you, that naturally brings some uniqueness to the thing, because if it doesn't fit, maybe it's not special enough in the way that you are saying it. That's kind of what this is leading to.
Yeah, it kind of forces you to take a step back and be a little more deliberate, right? Instead of just doing things on autopilot.
Yeah, yeah, but this is a very counterintuitive aspect though, because what do we complain? Like we actually complain about the opposite. When someone is saying something that we know for a fact that this could have been said in a different way, that more people would understand because they're using words that people know more, right? People get very pissed when they notice this. That they have a feeling that you're saying it just because you want to sound like a badass or something. But what's being argued here is that no, the respecting the form may cause a side effect of using different words. So very interesting. The same is true for constructions. When there is no room to do the obvious, or when a building must fit in a specific place, the architect must look for a new solution. Because constrained by form limits options, ways must be found to use a single space for multiple purposes. And whenever I read this, I imagine those Chinese/Japanese videos where they are showing you that the table is actually two tables, the closet is actually a bed, and like all of those videos. uh, yeah. Anyway, so then he goes talk about a little bit more about that. Uh, some of these things might be reasons to question whether the quality of the name really exists separate from the quality of looking like nature or the quality of being highly compressed. Software has a situation corresponding to compression, bump code. Bump code is code that must perform a particular task in a highly constrained footprint because there isn't any space to do the task in a straightforward manner. This is also the same argument that we've seen in software, that back in old days when memory was expensive, only the very talented developers were the big deal because because of the constraints of the tech. Like although we don't like the efficiency arguments because they most of the time they are kind of stupid. Here they actually have a point, which is because you don't have a choice. Instead of being efficient, you have to do it because memory is expensive. You have to be creative.
This is actually one reason why, like, I'm gonna mention video games here, like retro games. They are still popular because of, well, those constraints, right? They led to some very creative games. And nowadays it's like, okay, we have hyper realistic graphics or whatever, but what does that really add to the game, right?
Yeah, not only that brought up some new ways of implementing games, but also maybe new mechanics for the games, because we couldn't do better. So you were like it turned out to be a good thing because we cannot do differently. We had to come up with a new thing that is more efficient in terms of implementation, but for the user, for the gamer that is playing the game, that actually means a different way of like a different mechanic for the game. So that's a kind of very interesting as well. So bummed code possesses a certain aesthetic quality, not unlike the compressed quality without a name. The indirectness of such code is pleasing to admire, though not perhaps to modify. Well, it's true. Code that does is very, it has a quality without a name, but it's tiny. You are, at least I am frightened to touch it because I know that I may be touching something that I yet don't understand. Uh,
It's like you found a tiny little piece of the of a tiny little piece of the truth of the universe manifested in a small section of code or
exactly,
something.
exactly. So I can tell you some things about software that possesses it. It was not written to an unrealistic deadline. Okay. Its modules and abstractions are not too big. If they were too big, their size and inflexibility have created forces that would over-govern the overall structure. Every module, function, class, the abstraction is small and named so that I know what it is without looking at its implementation. Any bad parts were repaired during maintenance or are being repaired now. Go.
That second point brings me painful memories of a thing that I'm not gonna mention because this is being recorded, but you know what it is.
Yeah, I definitely know what you mean. If it is small, it was written by an extraordinary person, someone I would like as a friend. If it is large, it was not designed by one person, but over time, in a slow, careful, incremental way. If I look at any small part of it, I can see what's going on. I don't need to refer to other parts to understand what something is doing. This tells me that the abstractions make sense for themselves, they are whole. If I look at any large part in overview, I can see what's going on. I don't need to know all the details to get it. So these two parts are kind of they sound pushing against each other, but actually not. So if you're looking at the body of a function in a random, very tiny feature of a particular program, and you can understand it, that's what the first point is talking about. But if you go to the main thread of execution and you see the functions being called, that is also what the second point is talking about. It is like a fractal in which every level of detail is as locally coherent as well as thought out as any other level. Every part of the code is transparently clear. There are no sections that are obscure in order to gain efficiency. That part is a little bit. Uh, I don't know if I buy it fully because sometimes there is some dark magic going on that you can literally ignore. Like the quality without a name code calls this black magic, but it's not a very important part of it. So I don't know. Everything about it seems familiar. I can imagine changing, adding some functionality. I'm not afraid of it. I'm not afraid of it. That's very interesting. Do you have anything else to say?
Uh, well, you mentioned a thing that has the quality without a name, calling out to some black magic that's not essential to it. That actually brings to mind what I plan to do for Salem with single bit reference counting plus garbage collection for mutation of things that are not referenced more than once.
Yep. Uh, um, I wish we had a common body of programs with the quality because then you can inspect them, right? But right now they are secret and protected, and we rarely see any but those we write ourselves. Imagine a world in which houses were hidden from view. How would that be? Think about the quality of the name when you look at your software. Do you think your software possesses it? Well, most of the time it doesn't. Most of the time. Sometimes in lithium, I think we are getting there. Because a lot of the time, I'm kind of surprised that things work. Like, wait, this idea actually worked. Okay. And then they happen again and again and again. And I think that's an attribute that the quality thread name provides for sure. Okay, now go on.
Yeah, we should constantly strive for it, even if we don't get it at first, because eventually you will get it, and it's very good when it happens.
It's very good when it happens. And now let's go to the tool that Alexander proposed to be used in order to generate artifacts with the quality without a name. So this is pattern languages, right? So there is an important part here. So in the previous essay, we learned that of the divorce centuries ago of beauty from reality. That science could survive the divorce is understandable because science seeks to describe reality. Science can live and succeed a long time before it needs to concern itself with describing what makes something beautiful. Art, on the other hand, cannot ignore this quality because artists are supposed to create things that are beautiful, that have this quality. And there are few fields that blend art and science. Architecture is one of them. Computer science is another. Architects must design buildings that can be built, and architects have a theory about what they do. At least the ones like Alexander. Uh, yeah, now gonna go to what I said before about the aesthetics in Haskell. So, in a field that combines art and science, its practitioners are often divided into camps. One that cares about the raw science and traditionally objective characteristics of the field, and another that cares about the beauty and elegance of its creations. So this is again what I mean about aesthetics. So a lot of people claim that if you're writing any piece of code just because it's more neat or looks better, you should think about it at least twice because you may be doing a disservice to everyone involved. And the reason that they say this is because they are doing this division.
Yeah, somehow I don't think this division is healthy when you're doing software.
Uh, I think that's a very interesting topic. So I want to dive deeper. I think it really depends. If you are working on a place that everyone there is incentivized to improve, everyone is incentivized to face their fears, to face the unknown. I think this division actually harms everyone involved. But if you are in a place in which people want to be comfortable, people don't want to get out of the comfort zone, people don't want to understand what they currently don't understand. You just see like dude, this does this, so why you're not doing it like this then? Everyone understands this. The only person that understood what you wrote is yourself. In that type of environment, if you cannot change the environment, I fear you're going to have to concede.
That is true, but also I would argue that that environment is harmful.
Well, yes, but sometimes, well, I wish everyone has the choice of saying no to such environments, but I think that's a little bit naive to say. Some people don't have that much of a choice. They are in particular circumstances in a particular context that they need to concede. And in that particular case, you can agree with this division, at least on the surface, to other people. Uh,
That's a very sad position to be in.
that's a very sad position to be in. In software, we care a lot about good code. We rave about the good coders that we know. In doing this, we fell into the trap that Alexander points us, which is that the separation between design and construction. Before we plunge into patterns, I want to set the stage for accepted view on how Alexander established architecture. Architects are hired to solve the problem of how to construct a building or buildings that meet certain constraints, as specified by the future inhabitants or people in a position to specify what those inhabitants will need. The architect generally interviews those future inhabitants, studies the site, refers to the local building code, observes neighborhood buildings, considers the building materials and construction protocols in the area, and then is inspired, in the manner of all artists, to create a set of drawings which a general contractor in occasional conference with the architect reduces to a physical object. Um yeah, so this is like the traditional way of looking at architecture. So there is a separation. So someone is doing the design and someone is baking that into reality.
Well, traditional in quote, right? Because I somehow doubt that this is how things were done like 500 years ago.
Well, that's what Gabriel is saying. I don't know the history, but well,
Like
Alexander is
it could
definitely not like
well
that.
like it could well be traditional in the sense of yeah, from if you look only at the modern era, then yeah, I could believe being called traditional in that sense because well, that seems to be how things are done nowadays, you know.
Yeah, that seems to be how things are done. The view of architecture should be similar to software theorists. It corresponds to the waterfall model. Have you ever heard of the waterfall model, Marin?
Yes, I have.
Okay. The analyst or designer study requirements, construction techniques, and the context, and in the manner of our artist creates the design, which he or she happily tosses over a large wall for someone else to implement. Enlightened folks nowadays tend to view askance this methodology, preferring one or another variant of the spiral model. To be fair, the original waterfall model contains backward arrows, linking later stages to earlier ones in a feedback type of arrangement. So there's actually there actually is not as sharp a contrast between the waterfall and the others as people still want us to believe. So here's something very interesting. I went to university, I went to college, and I actually studied the waterfall model very at the end of my degree, and they didn't say this. And in retrospect, if you do not assume that there was no feedback loop in all the models, you're kind of saying that people that design this model of creating software, they were stupid. Like, since the inception of software, requirements need to change. Feedback needs to happen at some point. Assuming that the waterfall model doesn't have any sort of backward arrow to go for feedback is kind of like arrogant in a way, because you're kind of saying, man, those old folks, they were very stupid. Which, well, this explains it very well. Uh, in fields separated into theory and practice, we frequently find that aesthetics are fragmented, which is, well, 100% my experience. The
Yep.
theorist is often, oh, go on.
No, I was just gonna say yes.
The theorist is often interested in beauty of a nature akin to to mathematical beauty. In computer science, such beauty is exactly mathematical beauty, which is, well, doing all of these things, making it very sharp, very neat, very compressed. In architecture, the architect works with drawings and models. The beauty of a drawing is not the beauty of a building. A beautiful drawing has spare lines, simple geometric shapes. A home or town is involved, ornamented, shows a care for human interests, which is different. Uh, cool. And then one of the first contributions from Alexander was to reject the separation between the architect and the builder, and to posit user-centered design, and the architect builder who would blend the activities of design and construction. This was viewed by architects as high treason enough, let alone the curious quest for an elusive quality that Alexander cannot name. Well, so this probably was very hot take at the time. This was probably like made headlines on whatever Twitter they had. Because, well, yeah, the guy is trying to basically say that no, we should not separate those things. Those things should be live together. And then the tool that he proposed, the mechanism that he proposed to accomplish such goal, is what he called the pattern language, which answers a very important question that I had last time. How do you extract patterns without using abstractions? So I asked this question last time, and this thing answered partially, because the pattern language is basically a recipe. Uh, my follow-up question now is, okay, what if you do the recipe? You're going to generate an artifact. Can I not reuse the artifact after the recipe, or I need to create it every time? Because if I can reuse the artifact that I built based on the recipe, that artifact is an abstraction.
I would argue that if you look at it from an architecture perspective, the answer is no, because generally you don't use parts of pre-built buildings to build other buildings.
That's fair. That's a very good answer. But we are trying to apply this to software though. In software, you can in fact do that.
That is true.
But actually, that's a very great answer in retrospect. The reason that they must follow the recipe and you cannot utilize the artifact is because, well, that's basically destroying the previous building. That's a great answer, Marin. A
Thank you.
pattern, yeah, a pattern language is a set of patterns used by a process to generate artifacts. So again, a recipe. These artifacts can be considered complexes of patterns. Each pattern is a kind of a rule that states a problem to be solved and a solution to that problem. The means of designing a building, let's say, using a pattern language is to determine the most general problem to be solved and to select patterns that solve the problem. Each pattern defines subproblems that are similarly solved by other, smaller patterns. Thus, we see that the solution to a large problem is a nested set of patterns. Of course, because several patterns can solve a given problem and any pattern requires a particular context to be effective, the process is generally not linear, but is sort of a constraint relaxation process. These days, we know all about this sort of process, but back when Alexander came up was new. His initial work, well, was done when this was happening, but it was hard to swallow the idea of being subject to rules and generated by a language. Uh, yeah, so now we're going to go deep into the idea of the pattern. So one interesting aspect of this approach is that it isn't grounded ultimately in things, but stays at the level of patterns throughout. Some patterns talk about particular construction materials, but rarely is anything like a kitchen order mentioned. So again, we are kind of keeping everything abstract, right? But we said in the beginning, like we said in the quality without a name thing, that there would not be an abstract image that you could fit the thing. So again, I don't understand how can that not be, but this reassures my thought process, which is that we're gonna actually go abstract all the way. There's not gonna be special instances being named. This is partially to maintain a level of elegance. There are only patterns and patterns of patterns, not things and patterns mixed, but also because the patterns talk, in addition, about social and human activities. For example, a stove is really a relationship between a surface, heating elements. You know what this is remind me of? Well, I haven't thought of that. Remember universal construction?
Yes.
What is that about? That is the description of an object using its surroundings.
Yeah, that is actually true.
Well, wait a moment though. This isn't that this? Like isn't what I said just like this is an example. A stove is a
Category category theory shows up in unexpected places.
yeah, so the ability damn the ability to describe stuff using its surroundings. That's universal construction. And this is an example. Is a relationship between a surface, heating elements, thermostats, and switches, and a stove is part of a pattern of activity, cooking a meal perhaps in social context. Viewed this way, a stove is also a pattern within a larger pattern, which is the whole kitchen, whose other patterns involve refrigerators, preparation of surfaces, cupboards, utensils, dining areas, walls, natural light sources, gardens, doors. Some of the patterns must be implemented physically near one another, adding a layer of constraints to the solution to the kitchen design and construction process. Well, then we go to the example of a barn that, although nobody's copying a specific barn, but they are kind of copying the idea of a barn, let's say.
The form of a barn, one could try to say as
The
well.
what of a barn?
The form
The
of a
form of a
barn.
barn, yes. Damn. Yeah, and they are not they don't even vary that much from like California bars and Swiss barns, surprisingly. And then when you read this, when you read, because now this has an artifact, a barn, right? So you design it, you construct it, there is an artifact being produced out of that. That reminds you of what? Of abstraction. But then there is a gotcha here because he's going to say, Gabriel is going to say, that patterns that Alexander is talking about is like what are we talking in terms of abstraction, but without the systematic variations, which is a I don't know if I agree with, because it seems to me that the idea is that the systematic variations are systematic enough that they are also can be described using patterns. It seems to
Hmm.
me that non-systematic variations cannot be described by patterns. That's true. But if they are systematic enough, why can't they be described by patterns as well? Because in here it's in contrast, right? So Gabriel is saying that we cannot have systematic variations because of patterns. The variations of a pattern depend on the patterns it contains and those containing it, thus eliminating the possibility of systematic variations. But to me, that's not the case. If you have a variation that is systematic enough, then it becomes a pattern within itself. And then he says, patterns are not well constructed enough to have systematic variations. Their variations are too context dependent. Are they really? Are they really? That's my question. And then we have. Oh, go on.
That's a very interesting question. Like, how can I say this? This is like, when you have a procedure, not a pure function, but a procedure that refers to some context.
Uh huh.
That is that not a thing with systematic variations if it takes parameters?
That's exactly. Like, where is the line in which we're going to say that, oh, this variation is not systematic enough? That's a little bit complicated to say, huh? But anyway, so now we're going to go to the recipe. Like, this is basically a meta description because we are describing a description. So we want to describe a pattern. Nice. What are you going to do? You're going to follow this. You're going to follow this description to write your description. We're not going to go through this. But apparently it worked quite well because it created 253 patterns covering regions, cities, towns, neighborhoods, transportation, homes, offices, work communities, relaxation areas, rooms, lighting, lighting, windows, gardens, waiting rooms, terraces, walls, so many things. Yeah, and this is one of the reasons that I think I'm gonna have to read this book because he's saying that one thing that strikes many readers of the pattern language is the degree to which Alexander talks about people and their activities in the patterns. Because again, there is some sort of aliveness in the pattern language because there is an input coming from humans. I would argue that software has the same because there are humans asking for the software. There is a demand on the market, a problem yet to be solved, and this problem may change throughout the implementation of the solution. But because of this, many regard a pattern language as a manual to how to live and how physical surroundings can support and enhance living, because the patterns are a response to his arguments about how life is best lived. So that's a very good marketing, my friend. That's very good marketing. You want to convince someone to read your book? Say stuff like this. That's an easy win. Easy win. Um, um, and then you're gonna go. I mean, then there is an example. I don't think it's worth to go through an well, maybe just the beginning of this one. So this is an example from the pattern language book. So, and this is a very real problem. I don't know if you agree, but this is real to me.
It is a real problem, yes.
So yeah, we're gonna talk about uh, rooms that contain multiple people, basically. And here's the situation. No homogeneous group of homogeneous height can serve a group of people well. To give a group a chance to be together as a group, a room must also give them the chance to be alone in once and choose in the same place. The problem is felt most actually in the common rooms of a house: the kitchen, the family room, the living room. In fact, it is so critical that the house can drive the family apart when it remains unsolved. So this is a very big thing. In modern life, the main function of a family is emotional. It is a source of security and love, but its qualities will only come into existence if the members of the house are physically able to be together. And it's a problem, right? Because people talk, people watch stuff, people make noise, people do a lot of things in any particular room. And if you're doing your stuff, you may want some, maybe not privacy is the correct word, but you want some isolation. You want some isolation, right?
Right.
And this is often difficult. The various members of the family come and go at different times of the day, and they have their own private interests. These interests force people to go off into their own rooms, which is what happens to me. I am in my own room. Why? Because I have to have these two monitors and my computer and my keyboard, and I don't want to be bothering someone else. I don't want them to be bothering me. So this happens. And then to solve this problem, there must be some way in which the members of the family can be together, even when they are doing different things. And the solution is great, which is okay, let's make small islands on the room that they have these dimensions, and they are so there is a way that we can live isolated in these bubbles, but as soon as it makes sense for you to conglomerate, you can leave the isolation. And it's basically on the same place, so it's not a huge effort. Right now, if I want to be with my family, I need to get out of this chair, open the door, and leave and walk a bit to be in the living room. This solution makes it seamless, almost like uh, rotating my chair
Yeah,
in a
just
part. Yeah,
yeah, just turn around, stand up, and take a step. That's all it takes, basically.
yeah. So I don't know how well this would behave in a more commercial solution because, well, I, as far as my understanding goes, buildings are not constructed thinking of the possibility of doing stuff like this. What I mean with that is basically that there are walls, they exist, and they may be a problem to this strategy. Um, and not every
Yeah,
time you can remove the walls.
but the idea here is not really like the idea here is to build a house that's like this from the start, basically,
No, but
or
that's
build it in such
assuming.
a way that you can expand it to be like this, right?
But that's the thing. That's assuming that I have power over the construction as a designer, which is what Alexander wants for sure. But what if I, well, we live in the 21st century. There are already houses and buildings all over the place. What if we want to buy one and make it like this? We may have a problem. We may not be able to.
Well, you would be able to if you purchase a farm, and then you can do whatever you want in your farm.
I'm actually going to improve your sentence. If you buy land, you can demolish whatever is there and build it again. Um, well, what is interesting to me is the argument about how families are served by alcoves. This seems to go well with Alexander's desire to emphasize that the quality of her name is concerned with life and living. You see that the patterns are very much alive and evolving. And then you're going to go to a more key aspect of it, which is that Alexander's research is about generative patterns. Generative patterns. Patterns that generate the quality within a name. So it's basically a function. So the patterns languages is a function. They provide a problem. It's gonna give you a manual, almost like Zettelkasten in a sense. Have you heard of Zettelkasten before?
I have, yes.
Yeah, yeah. So Zettel, yeah, Zettelkasten. So this is a strategy to take notes. The internet we were promised.
Oh, it's yeah, Wikipedia does that every year, right? They request donations because,
Yeah.
well,
Anyway, zettelkasting is a strategy to take notes that alludes to the idea that things are connected. And they may be connected in a very unexpected way. We just saw one. We were reading the stuff, and then CT appeared. Uh, so that's an hypothesis. And why am I saying this? Because at some point here, I don't remember. Maybe I am. Well, I'm gonna talk about zettelkasting later. Then I don't remember where exactly, but I remember. Oh, I need to talk to Marin about zettelkasting. Well, generative patterns, and then a good example is a complex system, because what he's describing here using the random number generator is a complex system. So complex system. So a complex system is a system in which the the phenomena only arise. You cannot deduce the phenomena by the sum of the parts. That's what a complex system is. So if you think about it, uh, let's pick this example. Um, a random number generator is a program that performs simple arithmetic operations on simple starting quantities and produces a stream of numbers with have no simple relation to one another. If we look inside the generator, we don't see any structure or parts that are clearly related to the purpose of generating random numbers. So that's a complex system. There are other complex systems known to humanity. Economics, and the thing that I keep forgetting the name, the group of fish that walk together.
oh, you mean schools of fish?
Yeah, that is also a complex system example.
Swarming behavior, more
Swarming
generally.
behavior, yeah. Because if every individual fish is following along the others, how are they moving then? So that's a very interesting topic, complex systems. Um, And then there's the tennis ball example, which is to say that if you were to hit a tennis ball on the point of impact, your body would behave differently than if you just say, just swing, bro, just swing, it's fine. Uh, so it's basically like you give an instruction to someone to do something, not alluding to the final goal of that, which is kind of weird to think about. You're giving an instruction to achieve something that is not directly connected to the end goal of everything. So these are just examples. Just as a device to write clearly and simply is not possible to follow. Yeah, that's very true as well. If you receive this advice, what does this mean? Who knows? I have no idea.
Nobody
But
does.
you can direct someone to use their words and syntax carefully, to choose to be paying attention to the presentation order, emphasize topics in sentences and paragraphs. Those particular individual things indirectly help you to achieve the final goal. Um, so yeah, I would say that this is very real as well. Okay, what is the conclusion of that? So what happens if you have many of these recipes? What happens if you have many of these recipes? You're going to have a manual essentially, and then here we are listing one of them. You're going to have a manual, which is basically a collection of patterns that are prescriptions on how to solve particular problems that come up in development. So here we have one of them, the art of computer programming. Um, and why does that matter? Because we can now share stuff. That's why it matters. Using a common language. We have a collection of pattern solving descriptions that we can share with other the programmers and system developers. Um, and then we can point, right? We can point to particular sections of our manual, such as the algorithms and data structures in the book. And and then we can use that as our common idiom, our common language among each other. Yeah, this is why I wanted to talk about zettelkasting. So another benefit is a common base for understanding how what's important in programming. So this alludes to two things. There is a differentiation between what is more important and what is less important. I would say, although Magetta may disagree, I would say that knowing what is a for loop is different, or a while loop is different than knowing how to write one. Knowing what it is and knowing how to write one, those are two separate things, and they have different set of priorities. Different set of priorities. Um, so every pattern in a program is a signpost that helps developers new to a program rapidly understand it. And why? That alludes to a blog post that I wrote myself, which is this one. I wrote this at the end of last year, and this is basically making the same argument as this, which is that uh, if you know the most important patterns in this language, and here I call it fundamental building blocks, if you know those, you are fine, essentially speaking. Um, and then here we have an example of the while loop. So in low-level programming languages, people often write while loops. You can, when you come across to this style of loop, you wonder what it's all about. You wonder your ability to understand programming is challenged by the puzzle of why this loop is coded in this particular way. Well, most people figure out sooner or later, or at least come to understand the purpose of this code. However, they can understand it more rapidly if they have read the manual, of course, because the manual should contain such lessons. The loop pattern is important, and the pattern highlights the meat of the loop, the part that is repeated, along with the loop test. So if you know how to write a loop, if you get what a loop is, changing the syntax is fine. And I would even argue that you can go even further instead of talking about loops. You can go further and say that a loop is actually recursion. And you can even go further on that and say that recursion is a fixed point process. You can keep going.
It's all just proper tail calls all the way down.
That's a very Marinho thing to say, but true as well. Uh, and that's why I want to talk about zettelkasting, because this is a collection of notes. And the manual in this example, The Art of Computer Programming, is also a collection of notes that everyone should think about. Oh, okay, that zettelkasting has a little bit more uh, structure in terms of connections that we haven't talked about yet, but it reminds me of that. Yeah, so this is you're gonna make the corpus of patterns for the programmers more available to them, so it's gonna be easier. And then we have another example, right? So this hillside group, they talk about patterns and gather them up, and they write about it. They focus on OOP, not the new OOP, the old one.
Which is better than the new one, oddly enough. Well,
Yeah,
maybe not oddly if you know the how it came to be, right?
yeah. And then they will give you a description. Gabriel would then translate that, which, by the way, I don't know if I understood exactly this pattern, but we can talk about this later. This is not important now. But it is a useful pattern, and you can imagine how a book full of stuff like this would turn a smart but an experienced object programmer into something a little closer to an expert. That makes sense. And then we're going to go back to the relationship between patterns and abstractions. Um, Patterns, in comparison to abstractions, take advantage of common patterns without building costly, confusing, and unnecessary abstractions when the goal is merely to write something understandable. Of course, because patterns are written in English. And they are in English, and they are very well structured. They are very reliable. They are very well structured. So of course they are going to be more understandable, right? So that's not surprise. But then it comes back to my original question, which is like, well, but in software, the artifacts that are built using those pattern descriptions, they can be reused, not with buildings, but with software. Now what we do? Um,
Well, this leads to the very natural follow-up question: why not encode the patterns as software?
But that's going to create an abstraction. The reason
It,
that I didn't propose that was because the mere act of encoding the description of the pattern in code will create an abstraction. And I'm trying to avoid that. At least that's what Gabriel is leading to. Of course, he's going to defend himself, saying that no, it's not that we shouldn't use them. But let's not confuse their convenience in some situations as proof of their unqualified usefulness. For example, abstractions allow us to avoid typing. That's true. However, avoiding typing is something a programming environment is supposed to help accomplish. And one can imagine a programming environment that would let people use a pattern about as easily as an ordinary abstraction. Well, he's basically saying that you may be able to not use the abstraction if your developer environment allows you to rapidly leverage the patterns, maybe.
that there's a small issue with that problem. That assumes that everybody's using the same environment, no?
Not the same, but as powerful. Just as powerful. Keep in mind that the most useful patterns are quite large, like the one regarding concrete behavior in stateless objects. Furthermore, as Alexander points out, patterns interact with larger and smaller patterns in such a way. Yeah, this is why I remember Zettelkasten, because it's interaction with larger and smaller patterns in such a way that the actual manifestation of a given pattern is influenced by and influences several or many others. Um, then we're going to go back to poetry, saying that poetry uses a very strong compression. Is the characteristic of which is well gathering the meaning from its context, its surroundings. And then in this way, a small expression can perform a lot because it's surrounded by a rich context. Um, and then we go to the example of inheritance, right? So, but that you can leverage what a superclass established being a subclass, but if you have a very long stack of classes, it starts to become unmanageable. Um, and then for patterns, you can have compression if several patterns are present in one space. It is quite possible that all patterns for a house might, in some form, be present and overlapping in a small one-room cabin. The patterns do not need to be strung out and kept separate. Every building, every room, every garden is better when all the patterns which it needs are compressed as far as it's possible for them to be. The building will be cheaper and the meanings in it will be denser. So there is some sort of, again, we saw this in chapter 1, section 1. Distance. Distance. It's a matter, if you have all of them in a single, like, close place, it seems to be fine. But as soon as you have, and here's the funny thing, there's this notion of distance in code, although it's not objective at first glance, we kind of know what he means, right?
Yeah, it's a notion of locality, right? You're in a particular place of the code, and you can understand it by just looking at your immediate surroundings, right? You don't have to go all the way to another file, another module, another repo to
Yeah,
understand what's going on.
yeah, exactly. The distance in code is the amount of lookups. Um, yeah, then we're gonna go back to say to talk about small scale that force creativity. We talked about this before. Uh, and then at the end, we're gonna go to, oh yeah, the revelation. This is basically a conclusion, but the picture is not complete. The use of patterns is clearly helpful, if for no other reason to capture in a common format programming lore and tips. Again, you have an enlightening piece of a collection, enlightening collection of advices and instructions and suggestions that everyone can leverage. But the but concerns the quality of the name. Alexander hoped that his pattern language would generate everything with this quality, and he had the benefit of knowing what he was trying to generate because
Even
he
though
had
he couldn't name
evidence.
it.
Even if he had evidence, he had artifacts containing the quality. uh, which is a luxury that we don't have. But here's the twist in the story. He failed. He failed. This entire idea of pattern language is going to be generative process, generative patterns, and the artifacts created using this methodology will generate an artifact containing the quality without a name. And he failed. And this is like a cliffhanger moment. He failed. Holy damn. Uh, well, we're gonna have to go to the next session to understand the implications of that, the conclusions. I haven't read this, but Marinho had. So I'm gonna finish the recording now. So if you have anything else to say,
Yeah, this is when I reached this page, I just kept going, really.
cliffhanger moment, cliffhanger moment. Anyway, so I'm gonna finish the recording now.
All right.